Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, could something happening in 2027 affect how the Phillies are going to look at the trade deadline this year? Well, it's an interesting theory.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you live as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air over at 97.5 The Fanatic doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for over 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 4 seasons, and this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're checking us out in podcast form. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. Also, you can watch us on YouTube, and if you're checking us out on the YouTube, hit that subscribe button. It's free and easy. It gives you notifications when new episodes are posted, and all that stuff really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So check out our friends over at Game Time. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest on the Phillies trade deadline plans. An article by Matt Gelb in The Athletic gave a little more color to what the Phillies could be looking to do. Some really, really intriguing stuff in there. Also, we're going to preview the Phillies series with the Padres, the final series before the All-Star break. But this is a wild theory that, well, maybe it's reality, and it's something that not a lot of people have talked about that could be a major, major influencer of the trade deadline this year for the Fighting Phils. So what does 2027 have to do with this year's trade deadline? You might go look up the contracts that are up after the 2027 season, or maybe there's a prospect coming up in 2027. No, it's none of that. If you haven't been looking at the Major League Baseball CBA, you should be aware of this. So there's a thought process. I've seen some MLB insiders put it as high as a 90% chance that there will be a strike in 2027. And this will not be an easy strike. So why will there be one? Well, the CBA is up after the 2026 season. And one of the major points of contention between the MLBPA and the owners is a salary cap and a salary floor. Now, as you know, baseball is the only of the major 4 North American sports that does not have a salary cap. They have a luxury tax where if you spend a certain amount, you will be penalized a certain amount in tax to try and keep things fair. But the payroll discrepancy in baseball is ridiculous because teams like the Phillies and the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Mets, these major metropolitan? Yeah, I guess so. I think that's a real word. These major markets, we'll just say, can go ahead and pay players whatever they want and then bring them in and just outspend the lesser markets. Well, there are certain problems going on with that because you have to be able to afford those contracts. You have to be able to justify paying players that much. And the salary increase in baseball is not equal to the amount that the sport necessarily brings in. When you see stuff going on with TV contracts and everything, there's a break point there. And also there's a point of competitive balance that may be even further skewed if baseball's continued to allowed to operate without a salary cap and a salary floor. Teams that can't compete are going to spend less because the owners only care about the bottom line. Teams that can compete are going to spend even more because, well, the market's just going to get bumped up because every team's going to be throwing money at guys. That's just how it's going to work. And the gap could widen. So the owners are going to want a salary cap and a salary floor. The Players Association, they want their guys paid as much as possible. They want to make as much money as possible. They're there for the players. So if you cap, let's say you can make $50 million a year or whatever, or the payroll is $350 million where it's capped at. Well, the Dodgers are at like $338 million, I think, this year. So that would still give room to a lot of teams, but it would cap what some of the top players in baseball are able to get on their contracts. So the Players Association doesn't want to do that. Now, I'll tell you right now, just my gut reaction, I'm in favor of a salary cap and a salary floor. I think the spending in baseball has gotten insane. I don't think it's sustainable, and I would like to see that be a thing. But I understand why the Players Association is going to fight against that because it's not in their best interest. So there is a really, really, really good chance that we're going to have a strike in 2027, and it may not be a short one. There have been some people who have theorized that baseball may not happen at all. We may lose an entire season in 2027. So what does that mean for the Phillies trade deadline this year? How does that affect things? Well, let's just look at their ace. Let's look at Zach Wheeler. He has 2 more years after this year. He has the 2026 season and 2027 season. And then he said he is going to retire after that year. That's when he's going to hang it up. So 2027 would be his swan song. But the window on Zach Wheeler goes through 2027. Let's say they strike and that season doesn't happen. Well, you come back to baseball in 2028 and all of a sudden the top guy in your rotation no longer plays baseball and is no longer under contract with the team, and you lose that guy. And I haven't looked at the other contracts that are up in that year, but if the Phillies are looking at it like, whoa, this year may not exist, that would make them, in theory, even more likely to go all in on the opportunity that they have this year. They may look into the future and say, wow, well, if we're not playing in 2027, and if we could lose Schwarber, Ranger, JT in the offseason, Castellanos heads into the final year of his deal, there's a lot of chances that this roster looks very different, and we could take a step back. It's not just, hey, we have this opportunity, and if it doesn't work out, well, then we have a setback year and we bounce back in 2027. No, this could be a major, major issue for the Philadelphia Phillies and how they plan to build this out. And it may be the opportunity of like, okay, the future is uncertain, right? This is a morbid example. But let's say you go to the doctor and God forbid you get a bad diagnosis and they say, well, we don't know how much time you got. Are you going to be more likely today to go out to that nice dinner, buy yourself a nice meal, take that vacation, take the time off work, spend your money, right? Because you don't know how long you're going to be here. Now, in the reality of life, none of us do. But in that morbid example, it would clearly stand to reason that you would spend more of your money today. What are you saving it for if you don't know how long you're going to be here? And there will be baseball again. Even if 2027 is an entirely lost year, it won't kill the sport. It's not like Major League Baseball will cease to exist. But for the Phillies, looking at an uncertain future in an aging window where if you lose a year in this time frame, it could really, really crush the ability of this core and the core that will be left after this year to compete. It makes you look at these opportunities that you have leading up to 2027 as infinitely more valuable. So when you hear that, does that make you think that the Phillies could be more aggressive? Some insiders seem to think so. And we haven't really considered that and looked at that and how that could affect. Now, it could also affect teams like the Dodgers, the Mets, the Cubs, these other teams, the Yankees, that are in contention, but with these stars that are in the prime of their career to maybe even late prime of their career. It could look at, and the Cubs are a younger team, but well, some ways they are, some ways they aren't. Bottom line is, when you look at the teams that are in their prime contention windows, and that could be accelerated by not having baseball in 2027, they could be pushed to be more aggressive at this deadline than average years. And I don't think it's a bad strategy. And that may be music to Phillies fans' ears because, hey, who cares if baseball's out in 2027 if you sold out for 2025 and won a World Series? Dave Dombrowski, he's a hero in this town. Rob Thompson, hero in this town. This Phillies core finally gets their realization as World Series champions, something that they have not accomplished yet. It sounds like a pretty darn good trade-off, and you may have to make that trade-off because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of wiggle room in the CBA negotiations that are going to happen. So how does 2027 affect 2025? Maybe heavily. And maybe that's a good thing for Phillies fans that want to see this team go all in at the deadline, push the chips into the center and say, this is our shot. You may say that the window gets smaller in 26 and 27, but with that information, you may say the window is small in 26 and doesn't exist at all for anybody in 2027. So keep an eye on that. And keep an eye on how teams handle this deadline. Because if you see some uncharacteristically aggressive moves from teams around baseball, you better believe that one of the influencing factors is the work stoppage, the strike that seems to be coming in just 2 years. And as we get closer to that, it will become more and more of a narrative. I don't know what happens to baseball fans. I don't know what happens to baseball podcasts who talk about the sport for a living. So it will affect a lot of people, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The immediacy, though, is that this trade deadline may look a lot more opportunistic with what's coming down the line for the sport. And it's not something that we brought up yet, and it's just something that that I read about today that I thought, wow, that would be really interesting to bring up on the podcast if that's a influencing factor for Dave Dombrowski and his front office. So if the Phillies are aggressive, and we're going to talk about coming up from an article, Matt Gelb in The Athletic, they sound like they're willing to be pretty darn aggressive at the trade deadline. Maybe this is a factor as to why. Speaking of that article in The Athletic, Matt Gelb did a great deep dive into the various plans the Phillies seem to have based on the reporting he's done throughout the year, what he's hearing from sources, everything like that. We will break it down. There's a really interesting move that I hadn't thought about in the outfield that could be on the table. And who are the relievers that the Phillies are looking at? There's one division that they're honing in on. We'll talk about it coming up next as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about Supply House, though, because you need to get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. That's Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you're always going to talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Yeah, I said it was free. It is. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. So join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM. That's T as in trade, M as in master. And start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. It's super easy. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Again, supplyhouse.com. So Matt Gelb wrote a deep dive article in The Athletic. We reference his work all the time on the podcast. He does a great job covering the Philadelphia Phillies. So credit to Matt for all the reporting he does. I always appreciate that. And good guy as well to talk to in the press box. So go read Matt's work in The Athletic when you get done with the podcast. It would be great for you to be able to check out this article to couple with the segment that we're doing here. And we'll get to the preview of Phillies versus Padres, the final series of the pre-All-Star break section of the schedule coming up in just a little bit. But with the deadline on the 31st and us currently sitting here on July 11th, well, you got 20 days to make hay. How are the Phillies going to handle it? Well, it sounds like they are open to being more aggressive this year than in past years. In past years, you've seen kind of patchwork moves, right? Austin Hayes as a potential starter, potential platoon player in left field. You've seen Michael Lorenzen. It's kind of this swing starter, bullpen guy, neither one nor the other, but versatile enough to help the Phillies. He did throw a no-hitter. He wasn't exactly, though, a world beater when it came to the heavy, important games down near the end of the year. You've seen these type of moves get made. Noah Syndergaard, another one. Where you see him get brought in. But it hasn't been really the all-in moves that you've expected from the Phillies. And they didn't go all in the postseason, the off-season, with moves like Max Kepler, Jordan Romano. It didn't really get enough done there. Joe Ross was another signing. I think there are only 3 signings at the major league level. And then, of course, you had the Jesus Luzardo trade. But when you look at the way the Phillies have handled it, they've been like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of going in at the trade deadline. It sounds like this year they are more interested in trading some of the prospects that were previously off the table. The number one name that's going to pop up is a guy like Aiden Miller. Miller has had an okay year at Double-A, and he's starting to create opportunities for himself to be promoted to Triple-A. We know he's got a great bat. He can play multiple positions in the infield, versatile fielder, good hitter as a prospect. So he's an intriguing guy. And previously, when people had called and asked about Miller, the Phillies have said no. Well, this year it sounds like they're open to it. So Miller could be a name on the chopping block. Now, when I look at names that I'd be willing to move on from, I'm not trading Painter. I'm not trading Crawford. But Miller is a maybe for me. Kind of has been as of late because the infield feels a lot more solid. Turner's going to be here forever. Harper's going to be here forever. Bohm looks like he's settled in more to the point where you don't need to get rid of him. Stott, God only knows what he's going to be post All-Star break. He has not had a good year, and people are starting to tire of the Bryson Stott thing at second base. Great fielder, has not developed enough as a hitter. So we'll see. But the point is, Miller's looking at either third base or shortstop. He may be blocked. So are you willing to part with Miller? Sounds like the Phillies could be. And if they do part with Miller, well, they're looking at a specific division. The division that Matt Gelb mentioned in his article was the AL Central. And there are two big-time closers that could be on seller teams in the Central. When I say seller, I don't mean seller like basement. I mean seller like SELLER, just so we're clear there, because these teams aren't necessarily both in last place in their division, but they both could be willing to offload big-time bullpen arms because they're not necessarily in true contention. When you look at the AL Central, you have the Twins in third place at 45-48, 3 games below 500. And the Cleveland Guardians, having a disappointing season after a really good year last year, they're 43-48, 5 games below 500. So those teams, and being that they're 13.5 and 14.5 games back, respectively, of the Detroit Tigers, who have had an amazing year in the Central, they could easily offload. So who are the guys? Well, I brought up the Minnesota closer a lot. Yohan Duran is the number one trade deadline target that I want. The official trade deadline pick of Locked On Phillies, Yohan Duran, closer for the Minnesota Twins. Big time arm, throws like 103, has a ridiculous off-speed pitch in the splitter. He has got swing and miss stuff to the nth degree. And he's been really good in the postseason opportunities that he's gotten in Minnesota. On the other hand, in Cleveland, you have Emmanuel Clase. Clase has probably been the better regular season reliever of the two, but he struggled in the postseason a little bit. That may be, but still, big-time velocity, big-time swing and miss stuff, one of the preeminent closers in baseball. Those are two seller teams that the Phillies seem zoned in on. They've begun to scout the Twins more. They've begun to scout the Guardians more. They are looking at those arms. And if Dave Dombrowski wants to make a splash move, it's much more likely he does it in the bullpen than he does it with the lineup. Though there's not a restriction on going to get a right-handed bat. It's just there are less out there than there are plus bullpen arms. Every team seems to have like one of these plus relievers. So you can find a lot more sellers for that. These right-handed bats that can play in the outfield, they just don't really exist all that much around baseball, which is one of the reasons why Nick Castellanos isn't moving. And we talked about that previously. Like, Castellanos is not getting traded. So let's not do all that. At least not this year. The offseason, totally different story. But in addition to looking at those bullpen arms, there was another potential move that I hadn't really thought about in a little bit that Gelb brings up in this article. So Justin Crawford is at the AAA level for the Philadelphia Phillies. He's been playing well. The Phillies haven't brought him up. Now, one of the theories I've heard on that I think holds water is if you bring Crawford up, he's got to play. You're not bringing him up, one of your top prospects in your minor league system, to platoon with somebody in center field, right? To play 2 times a week. Rojas plays 3 times a week. Like, no. If he comes up, he's got to play. And there's not really that opening right now for the Philadelphia Phillies. But could they create one? Could you offload Max Kepler? Could you trade Brandon Marsh? Now, Marsh would probably get more interest than Kepler. 1, younger. 2, under more control. So, and he's been the better hitter this year, even though that's not saying much with the way that Max Kepler has swung the bat. You're not going to get a lot back from Marsh. But could you trade Marsh as one of the pieces in a deal for, let's say, Class A, could you move Marsh, free up that spot for Justin Crawford to come up, and then you fill that role by giving up a guy that you weren't going to use anyway, right? Because if Crawford comes up, he fills that Brandon Marsh role. Lefty bat, can play center field. You go out there and you let him play, and then Rojas becomes a defensive replacement, and then Kepler's in left. And that is your change to the lineup while not adding anything from outside, while also using the guy you're giving up to create an opportunity to add a bullpen arm. Really intriguing theory. I hadn't thought about Marsh or Kepler being on the trade block. I thought of Kepler more as a potential release guy than a trade guy, but some people who are trying to get expiring contracts to clear up space on their roster may also be interested in Max Kepler. Teams that are selling may be looking to just bring back a guy that they can offload due to his contract being up at the end of the year and just get that like rental that will come off the books. So keep an eye on a couple guys at the major league level. Very intriguing that is where Matt Gell brought up, and he's not doing this of his own volition. No, he's talking to sources, and he's trying to figure out what is likely and what is possible for the Phillies at the deadline. How do you feel about that move? Let me know in the comments on YouTube here if that's something that you would be interested in seeing the Phillies do. And by all accounts, they sound like they're going to be more aggressive than previous years. Maybe that plays into what we talked about at the start of the episode with the lockout strike, whatever you want. Strike, I guess, would be the right thing because the MLBPA would be the ones who say no in 2027. Maybe that's pushing them to this more aggressive stuff. There's other factors as well. But that's the latest on the Phillies trade deadline. Go ahead and read that article in The Athletic. Coming up next, we're not even to the All-Star break yet. We have one more series, Phil's Padres, and the big boys are throwing for the Fightins. We'll talk about it as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about game time, because have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day, and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. Well, that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible, and Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it super easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. Phil's Angels, the first home series after the All-Star break. Maybe Painter gets called up. There's a spot in the rotation for him. You never know. Game Time has last-minute tickets, so if you want to wait till the day of and the Phillies make that announcement, you jump on there real quick and get tickets and see his debut. That would be great. So go ahead and check that out. And they've got seat views right in the app before you buy, so you know exactly where you'll be. It's not just sports, and it's not just baseball. They do comedy, concerts, theater. Anything that you need a ticket for, Game Time can help you out with. So go ahead and check them out and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll even get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with our friends over at Game Time. So the Phils take on the Padres, and the Padres may be looking for revenge after the Phils took 2 of 3 from them in pretty comfortable fashion here in Philadelphia earlier in the month. But if the Padres want this series, they're going to have to come and take it. Phil's got some big-time arms throwing in this one. Now, it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series, so we're going to look at all the games. Ranger Suarez is throwing tomorrow night. He's been incredible. His ERA down to 1.99. No decided pitcher yet for San Diego in that one. So the advantage heavily in the Philadelphia Phillies' favor. But it's not just Ranger that they're going to have to face in this series. You also have Zach Wheeler throwing game 2. 9-3, 2.17 ERA, ho-hum. So you got a 1.99 guy and a 2.17 guy in the first 2 games. At least they get a little bit of a reprieve in game 3, those Padres do. Christopher Sanchez has a really, really high 2.59 ERA. I mean, here's what's going to be fun about this series, right? You're going to get some awesome, awesome pitching. But it also could be a preview to what the Phillies look like in a postseason series. So here's what I want you to do, right? Because you're playing a postseason caliber opponent. The Padres at 49 and 43. It's not the greatest record in baseball, but we know that they've got talent. You've seen this team in the postseason before. So it's not the Colorado Rockies. All due respect, ricochet shot there. It's a team that you can look at and say, okay, that's quality Major League Baseball competition. You have your top 3 guys going. It just happens to break out like that. So this will be a great case study as to what a playoff series could look like down the road for this Phillies team, at least from the pitching perspective. So that's how I want you to watch this. That's how I'm going to be watching this. Imagine this is the NLDS, and hey, that's best of 5. So you win 3 games, you win the series. If the Phillies sweep, hey, they comfortably took down a playoff opponent or a playoff caliber opponent with their best pitchers on the mound. It is still July, so I don't want you to say, okay, well, everything's said and done, this team's good enough. There's a lot more to still be figured out, but at least in this one instance, it's about as clean as a playoff preview for the rotation you're going to get as possible. So a really cool opportunity right before the All-Star break to see some of the top arms throwing for the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, with those top arms throwing, what's the expectation for the series? Well, you got to take 2 out of 3, right? You just lost the series in San Francisco to the Giants. A 500 road trip out there on the West Coast is not bad. Remember, we are still in that part of the schedule that I talked about on a previous episode. This is the survival part of the schedule. It ends with this series against San Diego. And post All-Star break, you get back into a chance where you can actually start swimming a little bit. But right now, your only goal is keep your head above water. And the Phillies have done a pretty darn good job of that. The series in San Francisco wasn't great, but you take 2 or 3 in San Diego, you call it a 500 road trip, and you roll into the All-Star break saying, hey, we've got some momentum rolling. Their record at the All-Star break, if they take 2 or 3, would be 56 and 40, 16 games over 500. Yeah, that'd be really good. And if the Mets do Mets things, well, you could be looking at a magic number in the 60s with over 2 months to go still in the season. Pretty darn good sign that the Phillies are in good shape to take home the division. Now, it's still early on that, but my point is this, right? We've seen Phillies teams of the past roll into the All-Star break without momentum. It was last year, I believe, or 2 years ago when they got smoked by the A's going into the All-Star break. I think it had to have been last year because we were all like, don't worry about it, just write that off. It's not that big of a deal. And then they just never really started to play good baseball again. The whole post-All-Star break part of the schedule, remember, did not go well for the Phillies. Now, I'm not saying the A's series itself was a precursor to that, but I'm saying momentum can make a difference a little bit here. And it's always better to head into the All-Star break on a series win rather than a series loss. But on top of that, it's going to feel even worse if you lose this series to the Padres because, well, heck, you're throwing your best 3 arms. These guys are supposed to beat everybody, right? You don't expect a Wheeler, Sanchez, Suarez series, or rather Suarez, Wheeler, Sanchez series to go in the way of you losing 2 of those 3 games. If they do, I got to believe it's because the offense doesn't show up. And the offense just hung 13 on the San Francisco Giants back on Wednesday. So they seem to have a little momentum, even though there was the off day in between yesterday before you start the series in San Diego. They got into San Diego. They've already been there. You don't have to worry about travel as much. It was a day game in San Francisco, so they've had time. It's just business as usual for the Phillies out in San Diego, which they're probably settled into the time zone too. I mean, they've got to. The more I look at this, they've got to win 2 out of 3 games in this series. Now, what are the 2 games that I feel most confident about? Well, I feel great about Ranger tonight, the Padres not having a decided pitcher. I feel always great about Zach Wheeler on the mound. And Yu Darvish, who is starting game 2, has a 4.91 ERA, and the Phillies have seen him a lot, and a righty. So take the first 2 games of the series, and then we'll see what Christopher Sanchez does against Nick Pivetta. Pivetta looks pretty solid against the Phillies when he faced them in Philadelphia earlier this month. And Sanchez, he's been really good, but of the 3, he's probably the more likely to have the potential, 3 earned over 5 innings worth of work and get bounced a little bit early. That is more possible, I think, for Christopher Sanchez than the other 2 guys, even though I expect all of them to shove. But a really, really good opportunity to watch some great Phillies baseball over the next 3 days. You got to stay up a little bit late for it, but It's the last West Coast road trip until, let's just take a look at the schedule. When even would be the next time that they go out to the West Coast? Maybe end of August? Let me see here. Because I'm looking at it now, August, they're fine. No West Coast in August. They might have one more in September where they head out that way. In September, from the 15th to the 21st, they're going to play 3 against the Dodgers and 3 against the Diamondbacks out there. And that's their last West Coast swing of the year and near the end of the season. So, last West Coast trip for a while. Stay up late, watch some good baseball, see some great pitching. Hopefully the games will go fast for you with some great pitching by the Phillies. And again, I think they win 2 out of 3. Even though the series scared me previously, with how much it matters to them now, dropping 2 of 3 to the Giants, I do think they take this one. We'll talk about it on Monday, and we'll react to all of that, and we'll see what's going on from the series. And we'll also have some fun stuff, being that it will be the All-Star break, just some general catch-up topics on the Phillies that are coming your way next week. But that's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you again for joining us. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out. And again, I'll talk to you Monday on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.